Hey, geographers, and welcome to this lesson on food and agriculture. So, the word agriculture, isn't it interesting that we hear the word culture in there? And we remember that at the beginning of this course, we learned that the origins of the word culture come from the Latin word cultus, which means to take care of. And so, when we talk about the word agriculture having the root word of culture or to take care of within that word, we remember also that there's the word cultivate, to cultivate. So, to cultivate, it means that you can grow something, you can take care of something, and that can go along with food, that can go along also with things that you want to grow or cultivate in your own life, good habits. Good ways of living, good ways of eating, good ways of just behaving as generally as a human. So remember that, like culture, the word cultivate means to care for, and a crop is a plant and it's cared for by people. So I want you to stop for a minute and take a thought about what you ate today and how responsible were you for creating or making that food. And then what I want you to do is I want you to think about where that food came from. Now, in Southern California, unfortunately, there's really not a lot of cultivating food, meat, really of any plants, crops of any kind. So when you go to a sort of a map that shows farming in California, Southern California is an amazing place to grow crops, but unfortunately now it is developed, so we're not able to really grow anything there. So agriculture is also deliberate modification of the earth's surface. So the reason why we change the earth's surface is because we want to cultivate or grow plants or animals so that we can also live and survive. So here's an idea of what American agriculture looked like in 1920. So it's a really fun map. You've got main farming cities there are dotted in red, and Los Angeles was definitely one. So if you scroll down a little bit here, you will notice also that in this map, California right here, and in the southern part of the United States, you've got Florida citrus, California citrus. You've got grapes up here in Northern California, and you've got dairy all in within here as well. Dairy in the Midwest, dairy over here in New England. Hog farming, cattle farming, a lot of cattle farming here in Eastern Oregon as well. So this is what American agriculture looked like in 1920. Now, this is a current map, so you can click on this and you can discover what farming looks like in your general area. So you can, right here, you can take a look at the Great Valley of California. This Great Valley of California is responsible for generating and farming over 50% of our nation's produce. It's pretty amazing. And if we zoom in here on Southern California, here we go to Southern California. It just takes a minute to load. All these maps will show you an amazing array of beautiful colors. And then you click on legend, it'll give you an idea of everything that's grown in these areas. So you've got hot pink colors over here. So then you find those associated colors over here and it'll let you know everything that's being grown. So now let's take a look at Southern California. It's all in gray. So that means developed. That means there's nothing being grown in this area. So if we ate something today, where did all of our food come from and how far did it need to come from? Where the average meal, and I mean breakfast, lunch, and dinner, each meal travels over 1,500 miles just to get to you. And in Southern California, that means it travels even farther. So that gives you an idea of the connection that we really have with the food that we're eating, and it's actually very little. So National Geographic ran a subscription, and it was called Feeding 9 Billion People. How are we going to feed 9 billion people? Here's an example of the Volcamore Farm near Scott City in Kansas, and each combine harvests up to 25 hours of wheat per hour, as well as real time data on crop yields. Most of the food Americans eat is now produced on such a large, mechanized farms, which grow row after row of a single crop. So, this is how our food is becoming produced now. The other issue that we're having is that we have so many people, and we have a lot of people, that there's a higher demand for meat. So when we have a higher demand for meat, it means that we need to grow food for the animals that we're killing so that we can eat them. So we have crop allocation for pasture and crop allocation for crops. Crop allocation for pasture means that we are raising food for animals, raising food for animals that we eat. So, for example, we are running out of room for cows. So, for example, there are cows being raised in abundance and in increase for McDonald's and other places in Brazil. So, cows take up a lot of space. They're being raised down here, and their meat is being shipped all over the world. In China, we have an increased population that eats meat. So, developed nations eat more meat. Developing nations eat more fruits and vegetables. So, if we're having more people and a higher population lived in developing areas and countries, they're going to be wanting eating more meat. So, a lot of this meat that's being produced here in Brazil is actually being shipped over to China. So everything that's in brown is cropland that's being used for pastures for animals. Everything that's in green is cropland that is used for vegetables that go directly to humans, which is one of the reasons why here in India you see very little pasture for animals, because India is still considered a developing nation, and in the Hindu religion, cows are also sacred, and they're mainly vegetarian. So, how do we use the land we're given? So, we've got undeveloped land, which are amount for deserts, forests, high mountains, tundra. We have 38.6% is land that's modified by humans, and most of it is pasture land. So when we're talking about agriculture, we're actually talking about a majority of this we're using as crops to feed animals. We're raising crops to feed chickens, goats, pigs, and cows. So agriculture emits more greenhouse gases than our cars, trucks, trains, and planes combined, because of the amount of travel that's required. So, for example, right now, if we are raising cows in Brazil to be shipped to China, imagine the amount of carbon dioxide that's utilized in that just one scenario. So, for example, what farmers are starting to do in order to survive is called monocropping. That means they farm only one crop. And so, as a result of producing enormous amounts of the same crop, commercial farmers like this guy here, they have to use an amazing and increased amount of pesticides and fertilizers. For this reason, a 2018 study by the USD claimed that the American diet contains the highest amount of pesticides in comparison to other countries. I wonder if we would juxtapose that against our cancer rates, what we would find. So, what we find when it comes to diet is that consumption of food varies around the world. So, the level of development that you're at depends on what you eat. So, for example, people who are living in less developed countries are going to eat less meat. People who lived in developed countries like the United States, let's think of somewhere else, like Western Europe and places like that, tend to consume more food and from different sources, and they consume more meat. Most humans derive most of their calories or calories through cereal grain, which is a grass that yields food such as wheat, rice, and corn. And here is a map of where we can find a majority of those crops being farmed throughout the world. The United States is wheat. We've got maize, which is corn in Mexico. And then we've got places like rice. We've got India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan. We've got Peru. Looks like it's mainly rice as well. The average consumption worldwide is about 2,900 kilocalories per day. The average in sub-Saharan Africa, which would be down here, is only going to be about 2,400, an indication that a large percent of Africans are not getting enough to eat. So here is a map that goes over the percent consumed of daily dietary minimum, and here you've got 130 and above, and then you've got below 100, and you will notice that the lowest rates are going to be here in sub-Saharan Africa. That's actually Afghanistan right there, and that's North Korea. The United Nations defines food security as physical, social, and economic access at all times to safe and nutritious food. Food insecurity accounts for 10% of the world's inhabitants, which is defined as 780 million people. So here we're talking about food insecurity and the undernourished of the world. And here again, to no surprise, we're looking at a majority of here in sub-Saharan Africa. We also have undernourished millions still in China, India, other places, and in these countries that you'll see. Many food sources provide protein of varying quantity and quality. One of the most fundamental differences between developed and developing regions is the primary source of protein. The leading source of protein in developed countries is meat. The leading source of protein for developing countries is cereal grains. So here we're talking about protein from meat. How much do you think that, depending on what you eat, dictates how much energy you have, how you grow, how you develop as a human? Those who have more meat or those who have less meat? For example, what's starting to happen, as I've said before, is that we're running out of room to grow food, first of all, for the amount of animals that we are producing and also slaughtering. So we have farmers that are clearing land by slashing vegetation, burning the debris, and here are some examples. About 3 football fields worth of Amazonian trees are felled every minute. We call this the Amazon is burning. So as I've said before, the Amazon is being cleared and felled and burned to create space for growing crops for cows and for raising cows. Here we can see aerial views of industrial farming in Brazil, forests that are being cleared for palm oil, cattle, and crops to feed cattle. This is an agent. So Brazil, what they have done as a result is they have actually hired police to go through and see who can legally and not legally do something like this, burn and create forest fires and slash and burn forestry in order to create basically what is illegal farms. Many of these people who take these jobs end up dead. But here's an example of what is going on in Brazil. The deforestation is linked to fires in the Amazon, since farmers sometimes set the forest ablaze to make room for livestock pastures and crop fields. These burns can get out of control. The Amazon plays a crucial role in keeping our planet's carbon dioxide levels in check. This is why the Amazon, which covers 22.1 million square miles, is referred to as the lungs of the planet. Again, here is another example of what's going on in Brazil. This year so far, scientists have recorded more than 74,000 fires in Brazil. That's nearly double of 2018's total. This surge marks an 83% increase. 83% increase. It's unbelievable. Here is an aerial version of what a particular area looked like in 2000. And here, 12 years later, here is that same aerial shot. And what is happening? So in geography, we study space and time, which means we study spatial and temporal changes. This means space and time. These photos above highlight how the Amazon has changed over the same space over the amount of 12 years. Also, in places like the United States and other developed nations, agribusiness is a system of commercial farming founded in developed countries. So here is a map of ideas of what agriculture looks like in developed countries. Here's farming, grain farming, livestock. Here's cattle in the United States. Here's the growing cattle down here in Brazil. Here, for example, is what we call the von Thunen model, and it goes through how people used to design or think about farming or how close we should be living to our food. So they wanted the city sort of in the middle here, as you will notice. So a city somewhere in the middle, and then all these concentric rings moving outside where your animals would live, where you would grow your crops, so that you weren't living too far away from your food. Obviously, in Southern California, that model is gone. It used to exist, but it does not exist anymore. So now we are getting into this point where whoever produces the most is going to have an increased product. So this chart down here is showing the blue line represents food production, population, and agricultural land. So for example, this purple line represents agricultural land. It's the same. But food production has gone up and population has gone up as well. So here are the lands that we're talking about have a degree of hazard, a certain degree of hazard in regards to how much food can it produce. So here in the red areas, you have a very high degree of hazard of what can be produced. So in the Western United States, it's mainly dry. So this is why we're talking about areas in the red, and areas that are low are going to be places that have a low level hazard and they can produce more, and that's mainly has to do with the fact of rain and available space. So this gets us to a concept that we call the tragedy of the commons, and this comes from Garrett Hardin, and he described the tragedy of the commons as this: the tendency of a shared limited resource to become depleted because people act from self-interest and short-term gain. So right now as humans, we don't live very long. The earth has lived for billions and billions of years. How long on the average do we live? Well, the longest living humans on earth are the Japanese, and their average lifespan goes to about mid-80s. So if we're only living 80 years, as human beings, sometimes we behave in a very short-sighted way. This is what the tragedy of the commons is like. Here you are looking at a bunch of people sitting in traffic and thinking to themselves, every single one of them is thinking the same thing. If these idiots would just take the bus, I would be home by now. This is the essential element of what it means to be the tragedy of the commons. That if we're all thinking the same thing and we're all thinking in a short term way, we're all going to be doing the same thing. So when this idea first took place, it happened as a result of the use of the commons used to be used where people would farm, they would grow their crops and their animals in the same space. Well, what happened is that one or more users would increase the use of the commons beyond its carrying capacity, the commons became degraded. Then what happened was more and more people started to utilize the commons above its carrying capacity. And then the land would become depleted. And then people would have to figure out what they needed to do in order to make this happen. We call these factors externalities, a cost or benefit of a good service that is not included in the purchase price or product of a service. Now, what does this mean? Externalities means that what is the cost, for example, of treating the land in such a way that in order to get it back or to get a certain field back, or for example, if you take the Amazon, if it's burning, the cost of that right now, we might not know. I will be dead in less than 40 years. We might not know the exact cost of what it's doing to the earth right now, burning down that amount of the Amazon rainforest until perhaps it might be too late. So, for example, we take the idea here of Southern California. Southern California, we do not have enough water to sustain all of us. So, what do? We pull water from hundreds and hundreds of miles away and we bring it up to where we live. So, for example, how do we translate that in the way that we've decided to arrange and build our man made space? No longer are we able to go to a farm just outside of Southern California because we've built in urban areas, we've built along the wildland border areas, and we've built in wildland areas as well. Now in Southern California, what we're doing is we are purely building just for building, and we call this urban sprawl. Over the last 50 years, urban sprawl is influenced by the movement of people from rural to urban environments. And we've also had the onset of big box stores, more suburban environments. Now we have an increased distance to our farms because now the suburbs used to be the place where the farms used to be. And now the farms have moved even farther and farther away. So now this idea of urban sprawl is also a factor in automobiles, living costs, urban blight, and other factors. So this idea of living close to where our food is, especially in Southern California, is now gone. Here's another example of how that has happened in Houston, how they used to have a woodland area outside of it, and now unfortunately that is not happening there anymore, and now there's increased disconnection with food. A place that's trying to counter this in a healthy environment is Portland, Oregon, and they are opposed to urban sprawl. And so what they have done is they have set a boundary where they no longer will allow urban sprawl. So if you take a map of what Portland looked like from 1984 and you press play, you will notice that the urban sprawl in the city of Portland has not changed because they had rules to make sure that that didn't happen. There was a such thing as called the Green Revolution, where people were worried that we were going to run out of food. So they started making these super seeds. Well, these super seeds needed a lot of super fertilizer and they needed a lot of super medicine as well. Then our global demand for meat has just increased. So increased prosperity for populations mainly in China and India have increased the need for meat. As the caption states, only the US and China eat more meat than Brazil does. The meat in this photo is shipped to China, Japan, and the United States. So these chickens are making their way from Brazil to us. So places that actually produce food on a very, very large scale, we call them CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. Now, there's a lot of advantages because you can pack in a lot of animals in one place, but the disadvantages are that there are a lot of costs, not only really to the animals, but to our land and also to us as well. So take a look at this photo. This is also in Brazil. Is this the future of our food? So I asked you to think about the food that you were eating, the food that you eat in the morning. Were you responsible for making it? And if you're not, where did it come from? Did you realize that it comes from Brazil? For example, these CAFOs, they also produce animals that are really unhealthy. So this is a fast-growing modern chicken. Sometimes when you grab those chickens from Walmart or Target or Costco also does this as well. These chickens who end up on people's dinner plates grow so huge that they're unable to stand up. This is what a chicken used to look like. For example, Harris Ranch in the middle of the valley, they're responsible for the In-N-Out burgers. This is what the cows look like there. I also have included a video of what, in this final act, activists offer water at pig vigils. You'll notice that Moby is at this pig vigil. So in Vernon, in downtown Los Angeles, there still is a meat processing plant for pigs. At 1 and 2 a.m., you can go there and hang out with Moby and hang out with all these people. They actually give water to these pigs on their way to being slaughtered. So there's a reason why the word eat local is so important. It increases the connection you have to your food, which is really, really important. Not only that, but it links us to our health. Like we need to think about our health, and it brings us back to the word culture, agriculture. What do we want to cultivate? What do we want to grow and enrich and make sure that generation upon generation really hangs on to this idea of food? Have we gotten to the point where our lives are so fast that it's not important what we eat and now we're getting ourselves sick? Food for thought.